Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name's Shoy, and today I'm going to do a wrap up of all the books that I've read in the last 2 months of the year, basically since the reading vlogs that I put up, and also a little bonus of like what were my favorite books of the year. I haven't really been back on booktube or even taking notes of my reading through the whole year, so my memory is a bit fuzzy, but I just thought I would shout out some of my favorites. I am randomly filming this at like 11:30 at night, so let's see how we go. Hopefully the lighting isn't too silly. In my effort to find a better backdrop, I'm also downstairs where my bookshelf is. I'm not gonna do like a whole bookshelf tour, but this is what she looks like. There's a couple more shelves underneath as well. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe if I film not in the middle of the night, then the whole setting will work a little bit better. With a lot of these books, because I just like read them and then I feel like they left my mind, or I didn't take notes while I was reading it. So I'm just like looking back and thinking, what were my actual thoughts? I don't know. But there's quite a few books. So let's just get cracking, get through them, and if you have read any of these books, then leave me your thoughts in the comments and we can chat about it there. First, we've got a few that I did talk about in my vlogs, but I really rushed through it at the end, so I wanted to give them a little bit more time. Three Wishes by Liane Moriarty. I'm gonna actually give you the synopses of these books because I realized in my vlogs I really don't tell you what they're about. We follow three triplets in this, and they have very chaotic, slightly dysfunctional relationships between the three of them, but also with like their parents and their own relationships, romantic entanglements. They're all in their like mid-30s, so they're just kind of trying to find their way, I guess, as adults and kind of starting families. And the book opens on a very dramatic scene where they're out for dinner, but there ends up being this like argument and fight, and one of them ends up in hospital. And we just kind of get a backtrack from there about why do they have such dysfunctional relationships? What is going on between them? From what I've read so far from Liane Moriarty, she does the kind of dramas, really looking at social dynamics, but also some like heavier themes do crop up. So I would suggest looking up triggers for this book. Oh yeah, it's also set in Australia. I think it's set in Sydney. I really enjoyed it. It honestly was like not that deep, just a very like easy and engaging book for me, so that was great as like a holiday read. She has a really enjoyable writing style, like there's quite a fast pace and there are so many revelations that just like keep coming, that keep you gripped. But she also does the characterization and like inner world of these characters really well. I really liked all the characters, like they're not perfect people, but they're very enjoyable as protagonists. I don't feel like I have a lot to read into it or analyze, like it was just perfectly fine. I did mention that I didn't like the use of the R slur a couple times. I feel like that just brings it down a notch for me. But these books are like in every op shop and yeah, just very readable, so I'm not mad about it. Oh yeah, I'll try giving things some star ratings. I think I'd probably just give this 3.5 stars. Next book I read also on my holiday was The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. I've got to say my enjoyment for this one was limited by my reading experience, which was totally on me. I just think I really rushed through it, and I wasn't feeling great when I was reading it on like the last few days of my trip, so I just think it didn't like sit with me properly. I didn't like really absorb it, so I find it kind of hard to tell like how I felt about it or what I really thought about it. I did really like the characters. They were very lively, and their relationships with each other was so interesting and really heartwarming actually. There's like a few different characters and places, but they all sort of intersect and come together over time. So one of the main characters that we begin with is a Hijra, or you know, like transgender main character in Delhi, who is like from a Muslim community, and so looking at like both their experience in the Hijra community, but also as there are these like religious tensions coming up, and like violence against Muslim people, and just like the ins and outs of like where she grew up, and a bunch of other characters around her. Another part of the story follows these characters in Kashmir, where there is all this ongoing conflict playing out between different like militant and separatist groups, and both India and Pakistan, but we're looking more at the interactions with Indian police and army. I'd say those are the strongest threads, but yeah, you kind of look at a bunch of characters who are kind of misfits, and you also look at these like social political tensions in India. The characters is really what shone through, and they were all so interesting. Seeing them navigate the world and really owning their values and identities, and just like how they want to live their life, and the stories that they had to tell from that was really interesting. Like, it really just makes you want to kind of sit down and listen to these people. There's a sense of community as well. There's this kind of home being built amongst all of these people. It's mostly quite simple, but it flows really nicely, and it still has its moments of like poignancy. I really like that word recently for some reason. But yeah, I just think there are kind of like symbols or ironies or details that she points out that build a really beautiful picture. The plot and the themes are also done really well. I think it was really great storytelling, but I just don't have the best feelings attached to it. I don't know, like I just don't think I was able to enjoy it that much. Like, I can look back and be like, that was really interesting and really well told, but I just remember reading it and like it not really landing with me. I think mostly because of just my own mental state. So I think I'd also rate this 3.5 stars. The final book I read on my holiday was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is like a collection of sort of essays and reflections. A lot of them focus on like John Green's life. It feels kind of like a memoir, but there's also a lot of reflections on society and just like different things about the modern age, or like the Anthropocene, I guess, as being this very human defined era that we live in. My phone ran out of storage. We're back. What I talked about last time was how reading about like capitalism and also the pandemic, sometimes it can be sad or frustrating, kind of reading about that or reflecting on how these things impact our lives. But at the same time, John Green has quite like a hopefulness and a love for humanity, which makes it worth it. I really like his writing style. He would kind of do this thing where he had like a few different threads maybe within each like chapter or focus, and you kind of would take a little while to be like, why is he talking about this, and like what do these things have to do with each other? What does this anecdote have to do with the sort of theme that he is reviewing? Because each chapter he like takes something really random and reviews it. Like, one chapter might be about a certain type of geese, another chapter will be about a specific sports moment, another chapter will be about like air conditioning as a concept. And so yeah, you'll have these kind of random topics, but then these anecdotes or like stories or threads that he follows. And yeah, as the kind of chapter unfolds, you see how these different layers might all relate to each other and then kind of come to a sort of conclusion or message by the end of it. I thought it was really nice. Like, I personally quite like it. It would just make you think a little bit and take you on a bit of an unexpected journey, but I just found by the end of a lot of chapters I would kind of pause to like take it in and be like, yeah, wow, that like did move me. So I think that's a sign of really nice writing. I also think they really build on each other. Like, I don't think I could pick certain favorite chapters. I just really liked the experience of reading through these kind of ebbs and flows. Like, you'd have some chapters that were a lot heavier, some chapters that were a lot more personal, whereas some were more like broader reflections, and you know, you'd go from like fun facts and interesting information to really meaningful anecdotes. There were definitely moments that really, you know, stuck with me or resonated, or that I had to like stop and think about, but it was also really easy to pick back up and like really dip in and out of because each topic was so contained. I will say the second half, the chapters kind of stuck with me less or felt less interesting, insightful. That might have been because of how I was reading them, because I was listening to it like on my flights back, so I think I was a little bit distracted. But yeah, I think a lot of the chapters in the first half were bit more meaningful for me. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I would give it a 4 stars. Now, another book that I wanted to read on my holiday but didn't, I read it all when I got back though, which was Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. This was one of my favorite books when I read it in like 2018 or something, and I think I enjoyed it slightly less this time, although I still think it's a really good book. This follows two main characters, Nadia and Saeed, who get to know each other and sort of have a budding romance, but as the city that they live in is being kind of overrun by this civil conflict. And the other thing that is happening as the book progresses is these doors are appearing all over the world that take you from one place to somewhere like completely across the world. The story really focuses on them and their relationship to each other, as well as like their families and the country they're from and like where they want to go, but also sort of shows you this broader story of what is happening in the world. I found it a bit difficult to read at first because it is just like a very human and sad story, and with what's going on in Palestine and other parts of the world right now, and I guess just like seeing the news and everyday stories of that, I found it a little bit hard to sit and read this story and absorb it, because I think I just kept being drawn to like the more like current affairs and what can I do about things now from the position I'm in here, which like it's part of the point. Like I think sitting with that discomfort or being moved by it is one of the most powerful things that a story can do, but I think it actually was a bit counterintuitive for me because it felt a little bit too real and raw, which I think is a bit of an interesting place I'm in right now in my life, where I find it difficult to read things about like the realities of the world and like political realities of the world that I want to make a difference in, because I find it hard to just sit and absorb the story and sit with the feelings. Like I want to do something about it all the time. I'm like involved with kind of activism and social movements, and like that's a big interest and like part of my life, but at the same time I haven't felt like I've been doing meaningful work in like creating that change. So I think that's part of it, is like I feel sad or frustrated reading stories because I don't feel like I'm making a difference in a way that I want to. Anyway, maybe I'll talk about that more in a different video. I still haven't done like a sit down what's going on in my life video, because I think just like social movements and social change has been a big thing that has taken over my life in the last few years. But anyway, all that said, for a little while, like it was really good. Like it was written really well, and obviously like the story that it was telling and the feelings that it left me with were really impactful, but I was a bit slow getting through it. I like how the story was told. It kind of feels like you're getting vignettes or snapshots of mainly like this couple as their life changes, but just also all these going-ons of the world around them. There's a quite unique writing style where he has really long sentences that sort of go on, which I don't think I loved. When I first read it, his style and the way it flowed really worked for me, but this time it was like neither good or bad. It was just like fine, and sometimes it was annoying. But there were also some really beautiful lines, so I feel a little bit indifferent about it, to be honest. There's some real heartbreaking lines in there, to be a migrant but also to be displaced and forcibly migrating, but there's also some really hopeful moments of people coming together, and there's like this sense of everyone sort of holding their breath and like witnessing or being part of these moments in history, which was really, really interesting. I'm really interested to read his other work. I think I would probably give this a 4 stars on this read, but I do like his writing. I always like, you know, stories that are really focused on characters at the same time as like really having this poignant image of the world around them. Like I think when you can do both of those well. It's beautiful, which is interesting because I feel like this book was also doing a similar thing, but in a very different tone. Like, I think this was a bit more whimsical and not quite like a fairy tale, but also yes, maybe because of the writing style, whereas this felt a lot more down to earth and like straight to your face. Okay, next book, completely different vibe, but this was Legends and Lattes. I've forgotten the author, but it was the audiobook that I listened to. I'll put it here. It follows a main character who is like done with her life of quests and big adventures, and she wants to settle down and open a coffee shop, and sort of follows her and the different characters and relationships that she comes across. It's about found family and building community, and changing and creating something new for yourself. There's a cute little queer romance. I thought it was fine. I think, honestly, the fact that it was an audiobook saved it for me, because what I wrote down was that it's descriptive in a way that a film is, in the sense that, like, you're really describing the scene that is unfolding, but, like, for me, it was not in a good way. Like, I think if I was reading it physically, I would have been bored, but because it was an audiobook and I was reading this actually also on my flights back, so like while I was walking and stuff, it was just like very easy for me to like build a little picture and follow the story as I walked. But I actually think I wouldn't have been very engaged, or gotten a lot out of it if I was reading it physically. For me, it was just not memorable. I don't know. I feel mean, but the coziness didn't quite do enough for me, and I didn't feel that attached to the characters, so it was just fine. I guess I would give it like 2.5 stars. Sorry, that's harsh. The next book I read was The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. This is a reread, and I also really enjoyed it when I read it, also around 2018. And I randomly found this at a bookshop on a camping trip. So I was very excited and I literally just started reading it immediately. But I think it was another victim of rushing through it because I just didn't like it as much this time. Again, I don't even think it was bad. I just didn't have a fantastic reading experience. This is about a society of people who are reborn into the same life over and over again. So they just kind of start back at the same place that they were born, but with all of their memories remaining. The different people who are kind of reincarnated like this have sort of met each other or sort of formed networks, but through these networks they find out that the world is ending, and their kind and humanity is sort of at threat. So it's sort of like, not quite thriller, but like a mystery kind of adventure. A little bit philosophical, but yeah, mostly very like plot-based, I guess. The storytelling is interesting. It's not very linear, because like we are following the story of him figuring out what's going on currently with this world is ending message, but we'll also like keep going back and forth to his past lives, and the information is kind of revealed to us slowly or withheld from us and that kind of thing. And I think because I was just trying to like finish the story, I didn't love jumping back and like getting these anecdotes. So I think that was partially me reading it and not being patient with it. But I don't know, it just like didn't do it for me this time. I remember when I first read it, I was like so engaged and so like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? Like I found it really gripping, even though it's not that fast moving. Like it is just very interesting. This time I didn't remember any of the plot, so like it was still fresh to me, but it didn't click with me quite enough. It's kind of sad because I like literally had just watched Olivia from Olivia's Catastrophe talk about liking this, and I was so excited because I was like, oh my god, that was one of my favorites back in the day before I left BookTube. Like now is a perfect chance to read the book and maybe pick up her other books, but I just felt a little bit indifferent about it, unfortunately. I think it's a cool concept and I think it's a fun book, but I think on the reread I would only give it like a 3.5 stars, which is not bad. It's not bad at all. I think at this point I realized that I was not approaching reading these books in a great way. I think part of it was getting back into booktube and like watching so many people talk about books. I was like, oh my god, I have time to read. I should read so much now. And so I think I was sort of pressuring myself. But luckily after that, I was like, let's take a step back and try to enjoy things a little bit more. So it's been uphill since then. I think I'm also just refiguring out my reading tastes because I really went from reading only kind of like fantasy and non-fiction books where it was like a complete escapist, sort of going deep into a world, or like a non-fiction that I'm really unpacking and thinking about quite deeply, to now I'm reading like quite a variety of books and a lot of like literary fiction and stuff like that. And I'm like not exactly sure where it's all sitting with me or what I enjoy about it or like what kinds of reading works for me and when. So yeah, still finding my feet. But the next book that I read was a fantasy, and that was The Darkest Part of the Forest. It's the only Holly Black book that I've read so far, actually. It's like a YA urban fantasy, I guess. It's like set in this town that is adjacent to a forest and a bunch of like not mythical, like elves basically, and magical creatures and that kind of thing. They play different shenanigans. They've often caused trouble in this town, and they've also, come into the main character and her brother's life. I've forgotten their names. They've grown up with this sense of magic, of mischievous and sometimes untrustworthy magic throughout their lives. There's this horned boy in like a glass casket that they've grown up around, and one day the casket is broken and the boy is gone. And things seem to be unraveling a little bit amongst the magical world. This was another quite easy audiobook read. I've been enjoying that, just like having something pretty light and easy to like listen as background entertainment on audiobook, which is really fun. I'm reading stuff that I had like heard about on BookTube ages ago. I love the atmosphere. Like I think this kind of moody fairy tale like fantasy books is just a feeling I love, so I really enjoyed that. But the plot and the characterization and like the dialogue I don't love as much. There was a bunch of like teenage romance and angst and even like sexuality going on, but I didn't love it. Like it was sort of a theme for the main character that she was exploring, and I don't know if it's just that I don't enjoy that as like a genre point, or if I didn't like how it was written. Adding to that, without going into too much detail, there is sort of a romance plot around the horned boy that escapes, and I was like not into that at all. And I don't know if that was just because of the narrator. I feel like her choice with his voice just sounded a bit off-putting to me. Like he felt not quite human and a bit disjointed, and so I didn't really vibe with that being a romantic interest. In general, the horned boy, and there's kind of like a monster related to his plot, I just didn't enjoy as much. Like I wasn't as interested in their backstory and like the sort of plot that the story was focused on. There was another element that was sort of introduced about a curse that the main character sort of has. Again, I want to be really vague, but I was more interested in her side of the story. Hopefully if you've read this, you'll understand what I mean. But I just think the focus of the plot, I was like, I'm not that interested. I don't think this story is that compelling. Like I wish we'd focused more on this, or the story had gone in a slightly different direction. It felt a little bit more forced by the end, so it didn't feel that magical and whimsical. So overall, I think it was like the right vibe that I'm looking for, but not the best execution. Maybe also being young adult wasn't like ideal for me. I think particularly with the romance stuff, I was like, So a few recommendations of like a similar vibe, but maybe a bit more mature, or just executed a little bit better. please let me know. Next book I've got is also an audiobook, and it was I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. This is really short, and it's kind of like listening to a speech or a letter from Vivek, talking about her experiences with men and misogyny and patriarchy as a trans woman, and just generally like coming of age and figuring out identity and how to exist in the world. It doesn't like deeply unpack a lot, but it is mostly these kind of anecdotes, and it felt like it would kind of work as like a TED talk almost, and it really worked for me, just like taking it in as this really short audiobook, but just like go in with those expectations. I think it was really honest and well written. Again, I also like the audiobook because it's read by the author, so you're just really like getting a quite personal account of how pervasive misogyny and patriarchy are, and especially as a trans woman, and how much they've shaped her. So I really just appreciated hearing her story. Some themes I really liked. One was about like not expecting men to be good, and like this idea of like what is a good man is really vague, and it's like othering, and instead being specific of what we want from men, like having these values of like communication and empathy or whatever it is, but just like demystifying this idea that some men can be good and put on this pedestal, and actually being like, no, these are the qualities that we want to see, and every man has the capacity to, you know, live out these good qualities, which I really liked. I think that's really interesting. I also liked how she talked about misogyny as a system, and specifically talks about like the feminine and like an ecological and indigenous sort of alternative. I think that's also really interesting. It wasn't explored that much, but I just really liked how she's talking about this quite holistically and like from this systems lens. It at least really resonates for me. She talks a little bit at the end about like positive ideas of femininity and masculinity, but I wanted a bit more like personal experience or anecdotes with that. Like I think a lot of the storytelling is about the harms that she's experienced, and only right at the end she kind of was like, this is the positive versions that we need, but we lost some of the storytelling and personal experience there, so I wish that was given a little bit more. I really like Vivek Shraya. I've like followed her on Instagram for a long time, even though I'm now trying to be off Instagram, but I just think she seems like a really cool public figure, and I've been really wanting to read her books, so very excited about this. She's got a few more that I'm really ready to get into. She's Canadian, and also she's brown, so I think like that's another reason that I am drawn to her as being like a brown queer public figure. I think I'd give that 4 stars. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I have one random DNF. I tried to read Wicked Saints, also on audiobook, when I was like looking for a kind of fantasy. I just couldn't get into it. I think like the plot was taking a little while, and like the setup of the world, it wasn't landing for me. I don't know. I also think maybe the like language and names, which I think are like Russian or Eastern European inspired, I think I needed it physically to absorb it a little bit better, so I was a bit confused about like what was what and remembering names. I think I just didn't like the writing style and wasn't interested in the story based on the first few chapters, so I gave up on that. Final book to talk about, and I have been talking for an hour, that's crazy. I reread Normal People by Sally Rooney, and I really loved it. It's so good. I actually could not stop reading it. I think I finished in like 3 nights. This is about the friendship and love and complex changing relationship between Marianne and Connell, who grew up in a town in Ireland, and then as they grow up and move past high school to uni and sort of find themselves as adults and navigating different social environments, how their relationship changes. Everyone knows Normal People, I assume, and once again, it's so good. You just really feel for the characters. I like needed to know what was going to happen and how the relationship was going to evolve, and I was just like rooting for them and like hoping for so much, and just was like, oh, like when are we gonna get the like satisfaction, like when are things going to be resolved, when are they going to be okay, when are they going to find each other again. Connell is such a sweetheart. I also really care about Marianne, like just great characters. I love her writing style, like it's so simple but it cuts so deep. I like the fact that I watched the TV show so I could first of all imagine their accents and how they talk. So that was quite fun for me, to be honest. Made it feel more real. But also just, it's so just made for like film or like a play almost. Just go deep into these interactions that have so much meaning and unsaid things. There's a lot of people who talk very cleverly about Sally Rooney, so I'm not going to talk too much more, but I really loved this. And I really want to read her other books now. I have conversations with friends, although that one's really controversial. And I haven't been that interested in reading her other books, but I'm like, maybe I could read all the Sally Rooney books and talk about it all together. Again, my thoughts will not be that clever or put together, but because I really liked this, now I'm like, okay, I need to get on the Sally Rooney discourse and read her other books. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't actually mention triggers for any of the other books, but a lot of them do have a lot of heavy topics, including stuff around like sexual assault and that kind of stuff. So maybe I will try to find links to put in the description actually for every book that I've listed. I've actually got one book that I forgot to talk about, and that was The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. And this has two little essays. One is like a letter to his nephew that is sort of like just speaking to the experience of being a black man and growing up a black boy in white America. The second one is a lot longer, I guess more of an essay, continuing on that theme, but looking specifically at his relationship with religion, with both Christianity and the Nation of Islam, but overall just like lots of different reflections about race and both whiteness and blackness, and obviously how those are dependent on each other in the American context especially, is just as relevant as the time it was written, which was like I think the 60s, because obviously we have not solved white supremacy, and I did relate a lot to being in Australia as well. Obviously it's very specifically American, but a lot of the political takes and reality definitely resonate. I also just think that his take on humanity and kind of spirituality and philosophical kind of thoughts I also resonated with. There's just a lot that I really liked. I'm sure there are ways that people like Baldwin, but like a lot of the thinkers and movement leaders during the civil rights movement or a certain subsect of them and their philosophy has influenced me. But it is great to just like read from some of their source material, I guess. I might read you some of my favorite quotes actually. I had quite a few that I wrote down because there was a lot that I liked. There was like one phrase, confronting with passion the conundrum of life, that I really love. What they believe, talking about whiteness or white people, what they believe as well as what they do and cause you to endure does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and fear. And again later on the page, they are in effect still trapped in a history which they do not understand, and until they understand it they cannot be released from it. That one really resonates, not just in the context of whiteness and anti-blackness, but also some of the like learning and unlearning about caste and like Brahmanism that I'm kind of learning about in the South Asian context. Towards the end he says, "If we who can scarcely be considered a white nation persist in thinking of ourselves as one, we condemn ourselves to sterility and decay, whereas if we could accept ourselves as we are, we might bring new life to the Western achievements and transform them." Later on in the page, "The white man is himself in sore need of new standards, which will release him from his confusion and place him once again in fruitful communion with the depths of his own being." Yeah, I really liked that as well, about sort of how there is a reckoning to have, not just with injustice and healing injustice, but also in what we become and the lives that we choose and the culture that we choose. So I really liked this, and I'm very interested to read his other stuff. I think I have stayed away from his fiction because I have such a bias against like classic fiction, even though this is not that long ago. I don't know if it counts as a modern classic or what, but I should get over that prejudice and give it a go. But I definitely am keen on his other non-fiction and essays. I think I'll give this 4 stars. Okay, that's everything. I need to shut up. What am I reading right now? I am listening to the audiobook of Every Heart a Doorway, which is another like lighthearted fantasy escapist little audiobook, but I'm not loving it. I need someone to tell me if it gets better because I'm so bored and uninterested right now. I'm just like, is there going to be a plot that begins, or is it just like the writing is not working for me? I don't know. Somebody please tell me whether I should keep going with this series or not, because I'm uninspired right now. I'm also reading 2 non-fiction books that I think will be kind of slow going. One is Braiding Sweetgrass by the author who I've forgotten. And it's also an audiobook, so I would have to check my phone. Anyway, and I'm also reading The Trauma of Caste, also by an author who I've forgotten, because I have this on my laptop, which is not here. I literally have a laptop right now. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm finishing this, so we're going to talk about those books later. And I said I would do my favorite books of the year shout out at the end. Okay, even though I read some good books in the last few months, either because of my reading experience or whatever, I don't think any of them have made my favorites. Like if I look back at the year, I'm not like, that was really good. Except for Normal People, it's going up there. Like it was probably one of the most enjoyable reading experiences I have had this year. So yes, even though it's a reread, it's in the favorites. So is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. The duology is great, but Strange the Dreamer is my favorite. I think that's just like my ideal whimsical, well-written fantasy. Beautiful story, beautiful characters, beautiful writing. So I want more of that vibe. Like that is the kind of escapist fantasy that I love. Those are my rereads. My other obsession this year that I haven't talked about on this channel was the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. I do have a copy of it. I fucking love this series. I started it. Oh my god, I probably started this actually 2 years ago, the series, but I think I only finished it this year, like at the very start of the year. Anyway, I adored this. I don't think I'm a big like sci-fi reader, but the kind of like epic adventure and it has a lot to say about humanity and society and how we work. It's very like Game of Thrones, but for sci-fi. Like, yeah, I'm into it. I'm into the political intrigue and big worlds and sense of the world just like expanding and your mind being blown because you're like, oh gosh, this already felt so dramatic and the stakes already felt so high, but then there's like a next layer that's unlocked and you're like, what the fuck? I love this, and I think it's getting around enough time that I could go back and reread them without remembering every single detail, but that feels like a lot. And I do want to explore some like adult fantasy series this year, maybe some Brandon Sanderson. So I don't know if this will be a priority, but just know that I really, really loved it. And if you do like any of these big epic fantasies, you might also really, really like this. The first book is also quite like a mystery thriller kind of vibe, which is really, really easy to read. And it's also like a slightly different vibe to the rest of the series, I think, personally. But don't be intimidated. They're so freaking good. The show, not very good at all, but the books, fantastic. But my other 2 favorites of the year were both non-fiction. I already talked about Shadows at Noon, which is a history of South Asia in the 20th century. This is just my favorite because I'm so interested in it right now. It is well written. Like, I think it's not very dense or hard to get through as far as like academic historic nonfiction goes. Not that I've read much of that, but I do enjoy academic kind of writing, to be honest. I do miss that about uni. I don't miss uni, but I do miss just like going down into research holes. But this book was great because it has unlocked some of that like researching interest in me, and I can now actually just do that out of interest and not have to like write an essay about it, which is fantastic. I really like this as a book. I love how it's structured. I think it achieved a massive feat and I would recommend it, but it is really here because of my own personal interest and connection to the whole topic of South Asian history and politics and society and culture. God, there's a lot to unpack. Finally, maybe my favorite book. Nah, I can't say this is my favorite book, but I think it's the most impactful, and I'm going to talk about it endlessly on this channel from now on, was Healing Resistance by Kazuhaga. And I'm just obsessed with this because I think this is like encapsulating a very fundamental part of like me and how I see the world in this like kind of ideology or unpacking of Kingian nonviolence, like Martin Luther King's sort of school or ideology of nonviolence. And no matter what you know or think about nonviolence as a concept, I would really encourage you to read this book because it is just so well articulated on both a like personal kind of human relationships level, but also on the level of social movements and society and like universal justice. I really liked it, and I want to learn so much more about Kingian nonviolence from more of those like root sources. But this is a really great kind of modern take on it. It's so short, so good. Those are my favorite books of the year. Honorable mentions probably go to A Case of Exploding Mangoes, which I have talked about on this channel. The longer that it's been, the more I've been like, yes, that was a really good book. So it's up there. Also A Day of Fallen Night, which was the prequel to Priory of the Orange Tree. I read both of those this year, but I really liked Day of Fallen Night more. I read it first, actually, interestingly. It's just great. Another example of the kind of fantasy and big world and politics that I love. Also No Bad Parts, which is a nonfiction about like a kind of therapy that I find very interesting. Me and my housemate are both kind of doing it with our therapists, but also just like completely outside of that. I find it really interesting, and I also think it aligns a lot with Healing Resistance, and is very like, yes, this is how I see the world. Very niche, but if you're into psychology, I would check this out. Okay, that took ages. I can't believe I thought I didn't have a lot to say on these books. I guess it's just a lot of books to talk about, to be honest. Not to be begging, because I feel like I'm saying this all the time, but please leave a comment. That's my favorite thing, talking in the comments. Tell me what you thought about any of these books, if you've read them or if you want to read them, or else tell me about your favorite books of the year. Hope everyone is staying safe and well, and I'm gonna go to sleep.